Hey, Wentworth World Entertainment, here's the question for you. Can they actually figure out what went so wrong with the J.J. Abrams Star Trek Reboot Trilogy? Now, this is the trilogy, of course, that all these people have beholded as the best Star Trek movies ever made and the new beginning of a fresh new take on Star Trek, and my God, it never failed. And now all of a sudden, they're putting out headlines to say why J.J. Abrams' $1.19 billion Star Trek reboot trilogy failed. What I love about this article, which we're going to look at and break down, is the fact that they still try and blow smoke up everybody's ass by saying it's fantastic, while at the same time saying, but it's not really, but it totally is. You'll see exactly what I mean. So, this article, by the way, we know the reason, and we'll get to the actual reason compared to what they try and say. But it says here, in 2009, J.J. Abrams had done the impossible. He successfully rebooted Star Trek, one of the most iconic franchises in pop cultural history. Years of continuity across multiple series and films had made the series inaccessible to a mainstream audience, to the point that Star Trek Nemesis was beaten at the box office by Made in Manhattan on opening weekend. J.J. Abrams' masterfully directed Reboot not only made Star Trek cool, but gave audiences a fresh jumping on point for the franchise. With a new cast acclaimed as worthy successors to their legendary predecessors, the future looked bright for the Star Trek film franchise as one of Paramount Pictures' new tentpole series. You already see where they're talking absolute shit. Oh, J.J. Abrams masterfully directed it for a mainstream audience and made it cool. That's bullshit to start with. Here's the thing. He's just said here in his article, this guy who wrote it, Fink is his name, saying that because of canon, basically from the original series all the way up to Enterprise at this stage, it was so connected across multiple series and the films that the canon and continuity was so connected, because that's how you build a franchise, it made it inaccessible to mainstream audiences. Does he honestly think then that if you come and just slap a new cast, new crew, however, they're the original crew, but just new faces, still with the niche title of Star Trek, that was going to ever convince a mainstream audience to go and watch the movie? No, that's not how it works. But you see how he said it made it cool, it made it accessible to a mainstream audience, and that J.J. Abrams masterfully directed it, and that the future looked bright. He follows it up with the very next sentence saying, sadly, that is not what happened. So you just contradicted your entire opening statement in your article by saying J.J. Abrams done the impossible, successfully rebooted Star Trek, and then you followed up by saying, sadly, that's not what happened. Despite the 3 films in the rebooted trilogy known as the Calvin Timeline grossing $1.19 billion combined, a series of poor creative decisions behind the scenes left Star Trek wounded early on, from which it could never truly recover. After years of failing to get Star Trek 4 off the ground, the chance for the rebooted Calvin Timeline crew missed its window. Now, Paramount Pictures is working on a new Star Trek reboot, one that will ditch the beloved cast and existing potential storylines set up by the Calvin Timeline. Now, I want you to keep what he said in this part in mind when he says right there that the poor creative decisions behind the scenes left Star Trek wounded. And he says early on. Now keep that in mind for what is coming up again. Star Trek opened in theaters on May 9, 2009. However, the film had actually been completed months prior, originally intended to land on December 25th, 2008. But the movie was delayed after Paramount realized that they had a summer blockbuster on their hands. Paramount also likely realized it was a stronger and more put together film than 2 of its other 2009 summer blockbusters, Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen and G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra. both of which were quickly rushed into production due to the writers' strike. Keep this in mind, people. Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen, written by the same two people who wrote all the Star Trek movies, Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci. So Paramount Pictures knew they had a hit on their hands and put a sequel to Star Trek into development in March of 2009, before the first film opened. In 2010, a release date was set for June 29, 2012. That gave the production plenty of time to get a script for a summer 2012 release date. So they announced this movie in 2009 to come out in 2012, and it still didn't happen because while production was originally set to begin in 2011, it was reportedly delayed due to script and J.J. Abrams' commitments to Super 8, which pushed the film back to December 2012 and ultimately to May 16, 2013, when the sequel Star Trek Into Darkness would open. That 4-year delay in a sequel might not seem like a long time, but within that gap, the blockbuster landscape had changed dramatically, as Marvel Studios' release pattern conditioned audiences to expect new entries yearly and to expect sequel turnaround times sometimes as long as 2 years. Now, they announced a sequel in 2009. How did they end up with a conflict with commitments for J.J. Abrams when he was going to work on Super 8 all the way up in 2011? How did you go from in 2009, hey JJ, we are so happy with what you've done, we don't even have to see what the box office results are, we're giving you the go ahead for a sequel to come out in 2012, did he end up going, cool, no problem, I'll wait for 2 years and then I'll start working on a different project and delay this thing? And then to say the script was also an issue. Remember what I said up at the top? What did they start saying? Poor creative decisions behind the scenes, and yet they're still talking about how great all this shit is. Don't worry, you'll start seeing what I mean by when they're saying how much everything still worked. So had Star Trek Into Darkness or any other Star Trek sequel come out in 2012, it would not have held a candle to the likes of The Avengers and The Dark Knight Rises. But following the strong word of mouth from the previous film, it would likely have been one of the bigger movies of the summer, resting comfortably alongside The Amazing Spider-Man and above titles like Prometheus, Brave and Men in Black 3. That way, Star Trek Beyond would have had more buzz going into it. In contrast, in 2013, Star Trek Into Darkness was overshadowed by Iron Man 3, Fast and the Furious 6, Man of Steel, Monsters University and Despicable Me 2. So he thinks that word of mouth from Star Trek 09, had the movie stayed in 2012, would have had bigger openings and would have worked much better, and that would have led all the way up to 2016, giving Beyond this massive boost. Except what he conveniently leaves out is Into Darkness, no matter when it was released, was received incredibly poorly when people went, oh, it's a knockoff, dumbed down version of The Wrath of Khan. And then Star Trek Beyond lost J.J. Abrams. He buggered off to Disney. The writers were pretty much gone, that being Kurtzman, and I think at that stage Roberto Orci, I think he was unwell or something at that stage, so he was passing on it. And of course, what would the Paramount's orders be as well? Oh, it needs to be Guardians of the Galaxy instead of make that Star Trek. So nothing was going to save these. So this anticipation killing development cycle continued with Star Trek 4. Despite being announced before the release of the excellent Star Trek Beyond, it was delayed multiple times due to the third movie's underperformance. Instead of settling on a script for Star Trek 4, the movie languished in development hell for a decade through various forms that ultimately led to its cancellation. That is some cope there, because that's not what happened with Star Trek 4 either. Star Trek Beyond absolutely tanked at the box office. Nobody wanted any more of these movies. But then the most important thing happened. Contracts weren't being honoured because Chris Pine had the contract with Paramount for X amount of money. And the leadership changed at Paramount, but the new leadership walked in and tried to renege on that deal and said, no, that's not with us, so we don't have to pay you that, even though it's the case of, yes you do, you are under the Paramount logo, my contract has the Paramount on it, therefore it's Paramount who has to pay this, yes you do, and they refused to. The other thing that was putting it in development hell was the fact that they were trying to do yet another time travel story, and Paramount were adamant, you're not doing another time travel film, you've just done it. You launched the movie off with time travel, you're not going to start it again with time travel. And then we know all the rest is history with that. So wait, this is the best part. Until 2009's Star Trek, no entry in the franchise cost more than $100 million. J.J. Abrams' first film would cost $150 million, while the sequel Into Darkness cost $190 million, and Star Trek Beyond did have a slightly cheaper budget of $185 million. It was clear that the Star Trek films needed massive budgets to pull off state-of-the-art visual effects to escape the image of the original series' cheap 1960s aesthetics and compete with modern 21st century blockbusters like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, DC Extended Universe, Transformers, and more. All of that right there is total horseshit. To say it needed a massive budget for the visual effects. Absolutely no, it did not. How were some of the special effects in the original movies better, 10 times better than what we got in the J.J. Abrams trilogy for half of the money? So that is pure cope right there. Plus, this is where you realize that none of these movies actually made money. When you're looking at the budgets, then you take into account the marketing and stuff like that. 150 million, they probably had another 100 million to do with its marketing. That'd be 250 million, meaning it would have to make in and around $500 million to break even. It only made 385 million worldwide. It didn't make money. This is the thing nobody wants to admit. These movies did not make money under the insane budgets that they had. And when you take Into Darkness's budget was up again from 150 to 190, keep in mind 100 million probably for its marketing, you're looking at almost 600 million to break even, and that didn't come close. So it's all crap when they keep saying all this crap. And remember, it's not breaking even, and yet we go back to the start of the article. What did they say? J.J. Abrams did the impossible. He successfully rebooted it for the mainstream audience that they could enter in and watch it. So what are they exactly talking about here? And of course, how do they end all of this article? Because it just goes on and on talking about like the movies, will Chris Pine and all come back. Like it says here, at the end of 2009 Star Trek, the film ends on the note of the crew of the Enterprise finally all uniting with Captain Kirk in the captain's chair and blah blah blah. And then they're wondering, will we ever see them return again? And it says here, in a perfect world, J.J. Abrams' Star Trek reboot would have kicked off a 6-film saga that gave the new Kirk, Spock, and Enterprise crew the screen time to match the original series cast members. Maybe one day, Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, Zoe Saldana, Carl Urban, John Chow, and Simon Pegg can return for a Star Trek Legacy sequel. Yeah, because that's what you want to do. Instead of going, hey, maybe we should give DS9 an outing, or maybe we should finish off a TNG movie or Voyager or something. No. Let's go and give the Calvin timeline a legacy sequel. Are you shitting me? So you see how they're trying to say it failed because it was a complete disaster, while at the same time saying it didn't fail because it was a complete disaster. It failed because, well, there was a delay in this, and Marvel was too big at the time and all this shit. By the way, saying Star Trek Nemesis failed because of Made in Manhattan, No, it didn't fail at the box office because of Made in Manhattan. It failed at the box office for one, nobody enjoyed the movie, but two, more importantly, do you know what came out with it? Return of the King, Lord of the Rings. That's why it failed. Everybody was going to see that instead of Nemesis. But them trying to make this cope off, well, the budgets are too big and the gap between each movie was too big. That's ridiculous. It failed because you tried to make Star Trek into Star Wars and then you tried to remake Wrath of Khan. That is why it failed. And these massive budgets. So, what do you guys think? Do you think maybe it was just due to the whole idea that, oh, the movie was meant to come out in 2012 and instead they released it in 2013? Or do you think it was just because, no, it's because they were shit films and nobody cared? No mainstream audience came to it because it still had the name Star Trek on it. Let me know what you think. And with that, I shall leave it there for this one. So do like and share and subscribe and hit that hype button and all that good stuff. Cheers. I'll catch you in the next one.